Hey everybody, we're here today with Matthew Rosenberg, comic book writer and other writer and writer of all kinds of things. Yes?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Mostly comic books, but
Mostly
I've
comics.
I've written a bunch of other stuff. Sure.
Yep. And we're going to talk about a few other things today. Right now, you have a new book coming out from Image, right? And that's one of the reasons we're talking right now is what's the name of the book?
The book is called "We're Taking Everyone Down with Us," and it's
Mhm.
out March 26th from Image.
Okay.
Yeah.
March 26th. So it'll be in comic stores on March 26th. And I love that title.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I like it as well. Most people get it wrong when they say it, but that's fine. As long as you're close, it works.
No, would you say it one more time? It's
We're taking everyone down with us.
We're taking everyone down with us. Okay.
Who's
I like
doing
it.
the art on it?
It is Stefano Landini is my co-creator and drew it. He's done a bunch of stuff. He did a run on the Punisher. Or he did some Punisher with me. He did a run on Daredevil, Hellblazer, just a ton of X-Men, Black Panther. He just wrapped Prodigy with Mark Miller. So he's been around for a while and done awesome stuff.
Right.
But and then we have a colorist team of Roman Titov and Jason Wordy, who are both excellent colorists I worked with before, and Hassan Otsmain Elhouse, my letterer, who is my favorite letterer in comics, and he's the best. And that's our team.
So can you tell us a little about what the story is about?
For sure, yeah.
Yes.
It's We're Taking Everyone Down with Us is like sort of it's set in a kind of 60s, 70s James Bond-ish type world of super spies and super villains and all that good stuff. But the story is actually about a girl named Annalise, who's the 13-year-old daughter of the world's greatest mad scientist. And she lives on a secluded island with her father and his army of robot helpers. And they've been in hiding and she was not aware of that, and when they are discovered, her life is sort of cast into turmoil, and she and her robot bodyguard are forced to go on the run and decide whether or not they want to make a shot at living a normal life for the first time ever, or getting revenge on all the people who have made their lives this way. And so it's a spy sci-fi adventure road trip buddy comedy that's also pretty dark.
That sounds
How
great.
many issues are you getting?
The first story is 6, and if people like it, we are going to do more, but the 6 is the complete first story, and then we might do a sort of reboot, and we might
Oh,
not.
great.
That sounds
Yeah.
great.
That's
I really like it. Yeah, I'm already looking forward to it.
great.
Honestly.
Sounds like
Yeah.
a really different type of story than what we're used to reading. So
It's funny you mentioned the mad scientist villain. Before we came on today, we were looking at old
Dr. Evil.
Dr. Evil dolls, the Captain
Oh, sure.
Action character online, because I was talking about how much I wanted one of those, and they're just way out of my price range. And so
Yeah.
we were talking about that whole,
Evil scientist.
evil scientist. Like,
I feel like that's really something that's fallen out of vogue in
Yeah.
pop culture.
Yeah.
Like, I love that James Bond is full of like weird scientist type guys, and
Mhm.
Dr. Evil, and obviously all the old Spider-Man villains are like
Yeah.
scientists, and, and they're great. And now we don't really make scientists evil anymore, and I understand why culturally, but
Right.
Yeah.
You're
I like-
right. That's
an evil scientist is pretty fun.
I get the sense that might be coming down the pike again, though, with the way culture's going at the moment.
Sure, yeah, and everything's on the table, and certainly evil scientist is definitely on the table. But yeah, maybe I'm just at the forefront of the evil scientist revitalization.
you are restarting the trend right now.
Right at the
Yeah.
bleeding edge.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
bummer, but yeah, that's where we are.
So the reason why you're on here is the reason we pick creators that we really like, that we've been reading something or stuff that they do, and I reached out to you because you have been writing the DC vampires since the first issue, right?
Yes, yes.
So just so everyone sees, these are all the DC vampire.
That's a lot.
This is everything. This is everything you've put out up to, and I will, before I let you talk about it, I will commend you, because one of my favorite characters in the DC universe who is never used is Mr. Miracle.
Mhm.
And you used him in these last 2 issues.
Yeah,
I don't want to reveal anything, but hopefully what you said happened to him in this last issue didn't actually happen. That's what I'm hoping.
All right, we won't talk about it.
Yeah, we won't talk about it. But
No, I love Mr. Miracle. I love all the fourth world characters are great, and I'm a big fan of all of them. So it was fun to get to use them, and it's fun. Like DC versus Vampires is really fun because it's an Elseworlds, which I was at Marvel for 5 years, and I think things are changing a little bit with the audience and the way they handle things, with like the multiverse and whatever. But doing Elseworlds type stories at Marvel, like What Ifs, the audience was never really enthusiastic about them. It was very hard for Marvel to do. But DC readers really love that stuff and sort of embrace the chance to like see a different take on the characters and a different spin. So it's really fun to like. I'm trying to stay true to who the characters are, but then take them places that we wouldn't normally be able to take them. So that's why you get Wonder Woman ripping people in half.
Batgirl's been as fantastic as the leader of the vampires. Absolutely, great way to go with the character.
Yeah. That's we when we finished the first series, we knew going into the end game that we were going to get to do more. Like DC was like, this is going really well and we want you to continue it, but it wasn't going to be publicly announced because we needed time to sort of build it and do a second volume. And so we ended with just Batgirl as the baddie at the end of the first volume. And I think a lot of the audience was really sort of taken aback that they thought that was the final end. And I was like, well, I don't dislike it as a final end, but now we get to like really play with her and
you're really exploring her as that evil.
Yeah. And I think she's really fun, and I'm a huge Barbara Gordon fan, always have been. So
massively underrated character in DC,
for sure,
in my opinion. She's a great character.
One of the things too about it is that you're not really riding like Superman or Batman in this. They're not really playing big role in the story.
Yeah, I mean the book is interesting because when it started, the origin of the book is a weird one because it's something that James Tynion had pitched to DC, and James was going to do it because he was only going to be on Batman for a little bit. Mm-hmm. He was a placeholder writer on Batman while they struggled to find somewhere else, and then his run was incredibly popular, and everything was selling out all the time, and the orders were going through the roof, and so they were like, "Can you please stay on Batman?" And he said, "Of course." And then suddenly they said, "Okay, now we have to do the Vampires book," and he said, "I can't do both. Like Batman's a full-time job."
Yeah.
And so he pinged me and said, see if I wanted to do it, and I did. But I was working off his original pitch, which was, like half a page. It was just some like loose ideas to get it going. But I think he thought very early on that it was going to be a Bat Family book, primarily. James, I mean, I love the Bat Family too, but James is a fanatic for that stuff, and he was very much like, yeah, it's going to be Batman versus Nightwing, and that's going to be the whole push of it, and that's really fun and a great book, and I would have liked to have read his take on that. But I was like, I think we have a chance to really spotlight some characters that don't normally get the spotlight, and so we took Batman off the table pretty quick, and we took Superman off the table, and they all have their moments to shine, but it's about I want to do a Green Arrow book, I want to do a Constantine book, I want to do Swamp Thing, I want to put Grifter in there and Black Canary and all these characters that I love that are, harder to put on a cover of a book. Like Batman is the easiest one to sell. And so when we have a book that's doing well, you have the luxury of making people read a Green Arrow story. And that's great for me. I love that.
And in this story, who's your Green Lantern?
Well, we've had a few and they've all died. Hal was there and he got killed. And his ring went into an armory of Batman's and sat there. And only recently it has been used because Alfred was about to die. And
it's a
know what to do.
Story that he's the Green Lantern. It's
Alfred has become our Green Lantern.
That's very unexpected.
Yeah, you know what? It's weird because I thought of it. And I was like, surely this has happened. And we checked and we were like, no one can find an Alfred as Green Lantern story. And I was like, it just makes so much sense to me. He's such a good, Green Lantern is such a good moral compass for the DC universe. And Alfred is such a force of just good in the world.
Yes.
That bringing them together just made sense. And actually we have this week. maybe tomorrow. There's a one shot coming out.
Yes, tomorrow. That comes out tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow. That is an Alfred story of Alfred. He has the ring, but he's not quite yet good with it.
Mhm.
He doesn't have what it takes, and so he is going to be learning to use the ring from an unexpected teacher.
Now, when you were writing these vampire stories, are you a fan of vampire stories?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I think it's just a fun sort of myth to play with, and obviously, like everybody likes Dracula and stuff. But yeah,
Sure.
no, I like vampire stuff for sure.
I was wondering, wait, like, what do you think the influences were for this? Like, are you going like back to Dracula? Are you going to Lost Boys? Are you
Hammer.
like, how far? Like,
Horror.
Yeah, I mean, it's all of that. It's funny because vampires are such a weird thing because there's like a lot of rules, but then people sort of pick and choose which rules they want to go with.
yeah,
And so we did that, and I have a list of rules that are like the vampires work this way. And obviously, when you add aliens and people with superpowers,
sure.
all of that gets asterisked and has
Yeah.
weird footnotes. But we went and sort of picked, and I was like looking at the Bram Stoker stuff, and yeah, stuff like everything from like Lost Boys, like you said, Buffy, all over the place. Like there's just like any vampire thing is sort of fair game for us. Nosferatu and
Mhm.
and then we had all these rules, and then we never clearly stated what they were for the audience. And I think some of the audience was always just like, well, wait, why can they do this? And how do they do this? And so actually in that upcoming one shot, we actually do a young vampire is sort of Wonder Woman's apprentice. And she is asking Wonder Woman as she becomes a vampire, like, how does this work? And
Right.
so she's literally asking about garlic and mirrors and all this stuff, and Wonder Woman is explaining it to her. But I came up with some I had notes that are very complicated about why they do have reflections and why certain things do work. And
Mhm.
and then I was like, yeah, this isn't good story. Like, no one buys a book to be like, what are the rules of why characters appear in mirrors? And I'm just
Right.
like, I'm not going to talk about that.
Yeah.
So we have a scene in the beginning of the book where Batman is doing tests on his family to make sure they're vampires, and actually Nightwing has a workaround for the tests that he can pass the tests, and so that's an early indicator that there are rules that we have, but
Right.
we don't go too much into it.
Now, when you're writing something like this and you turn Alfred into a Green Lantern, do you have to get approval on that, or is because it's in Elseworlds, you pretty much can do whatever you would like?
So there's sort of two layers to that. It's my universe. Like, there's no point is Josh Williamson or Tom King or Kelly Thompson going to be like, I'm actually using this over here.
Yeah.
So we don't have to play well with anyone. There's no rules in that regard. There are certain things that more from a legal standpoint and a protecting the character standpoint, where they get, I'll get the call of just like, hey, we just have to run this by. And DC's been great. Like, DC really embraces the idea of the Elseworld and be like,
Yeah.
can we kill Batman? Yes. Can we, have, Green Lantern kill people? Like, yes.
Right.
All those things are fine. The one that was a real holdup for us, and it worked out in the end, was in the very first issue, we have Green Lantern take one of the Wonder Twins, and he creates a green energy blender and puts them in a blender and then drinks them like a smoothie.
He kills them.
Yeah, and it's
That's
They
so
were like-
Evil Dead. I love it.
yeah, they were like, we don't know, because the Wonder Twins are from animation, so it's not purely their purview. And they were like,
okay.
also, it's a kid, he's a kind of young, and you're putting a child in a blender. And so that was like a holdup for 2 weeks as we were trying to parse it. And then they're like, nope, all thumbs up, you can do it. So we did that.
Great.
Other than that, the only other thing is that I've tried to use a bunch of characters. There are certain characters in the DC universe who are very tied to certain creators.
Right.
And so sometimes they're like, well, that creator, we like to give them the courtesy of a yes or no if they want them to appear in this book. And my feeling is always like, I think it would be fun to play with most of those characters, but I don't necessarily want to put creators on the spot to give their thumbs up or thumbs down. And if they're precious about them, I'm like, we do horrible things to these characters. So if you're precious about, whoever, and it goes a bunch of places. So there was a few that they said like, oh, we'd have to ask on this, and I was like, oh, don't bother. But we weren't told no on anything actually.
So is there a possibility down the road that multiverse kind of thing, that we could see any of these characters in the actual DC?
I mean, anything's possible. They do multiverse jumping stories. We don't have plans for that. But it is a funny idea, and I wouldn't put it past anyone at any point to just sort of grab someone if they're, like Vampire Nightwing was very popular. Like, I wouldn't put it past someone to be like, yeah, popped into an Elseworld and grabbed him. But yeah, like but for stuff like Us and Injustice and Gotham by Gaslight, like those characters can pop up. It's all the multiverse, but they just don't very much.
Right, they don't.
You mentioned before that DC seems to be more open to Elseworld stories, or at least the fandom.
Yeah.
More open to it than like the What If at Marvel. And I always wondered if that. Well, I don't always wonder, but you just made me wonder. I wonder if that's because DC had like experience with that beforehand, because like way back in the 60s, they were doing things called imaginary stories,
Yeah.
like when Superman gets killed by Lex Luthor, or something like that. And I'm like, well, it really didn't happen. It's an imaginary story.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's why they'd be more open to it, which is cool, because those are the stories I always found as a fan to be more interesting.
Sure.
Like they had like real stakes, like.
Yeah, I love continuity. I grew up on all that stuff. I love Marvel continuity and DC continuity, and they're very fun. But it's just a different experience to be like, well, I don't actually know what they're capable of in the story, what they're allowed to do. Like, I read a Batman comic, and yeah, he died once, but like mostly he's not gonna die.
Yeah.
But if you pick up Injustice, he might die. If you pick up DC vs. Vampires, he might die.
Yeah.
And I like that. I like that it changes the experience. It's just like, I wouldn't want it all the time, but I like a sort of there's no rules approach to the Elseworlds. I think part of it also is that DC has rebooted their continuity. The various crises and whatnot. So like, I think the fans understand that this stuff is permanent but also malleable, and so Marvel fans, it's Marvel has such an interesting problem because you start to get into origins of characters that are starting to be pretty weird, where you're just like, like Tony Stark was in Vietnam, like that's a little strange.
Oh,
Captain America has been out of the ice so long that you're like, well, I know he was frozen for a long time, but he'd be an old man now again.
He'd still be old, yeah.
And DC sort of doesn't play with that as much because their time is a little more malleable. And so I think the fans are I think it's just a different mindset. But I also, like I grew up, I loved Marvel What Ifs. I think What Ifs are so fun.
They were great.
And I know they still do them and stuff, but they just don't have the buy-in that Marvel does them as one-shots and DC does them as like prestige events. So it's a very different feel to them.
Well, you brought up Injustice, which is one of my favorite Elseworld stories. I love it.
Sure.
And along with Earth 2, the New 52 Earth 2 series.
Yeah.
Which I thought was another great sort of Elseworlds kind of version of things. Because again, I think people, I feel like people get too precious about continuity and they kind of hold back storytelling sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think they're all tools, and I think continuity can be amazing. I think it's amazing. Like for me, I'm such a fanboy and such a nerd for this stuff that like I get a real thrill out of touching characters that Jack Kirby created and being like, there's a thread, like there's a straight line between Ditko to me. Like that's amazing. That's the coolest thing that That's 8-year-old me's brain blowing up, just being like, I'm going to make something that is tied to this in some way. But also, and the good storytellers use that continuity as a tool. They're good at being like, this references this and this plays on these things and these are established. But also, you can throw out that tool and bring in another tool, which is the Elseworlds, where it's like, well, you know some of the rules and it's very unexpected. It's very funny to me because I read a lot of big two creators, independent books, and a lot of times I see that they stumble out of the gate because they're so used to telling stories where everybody knows who the characters are when they start. Yeah. And that they're like have a hard time explaining who people are because you never have to explain who Batman is when he walks into a comic. You never have to explain who Captain America is. And so it's funny because those are literally like any other storyteller, you have to learn how to introduce a character and make us care about them from the start and all that. And for big two comic creators, like you can let that tool rust if you're not careful and sort of lose it from your tool chest. And so I like the Elseworld stuff and the what ifs because that throws out that idea. And you can be like, well, I'm introducing a Batman, but he's not the same Batman. I'm introducing Green Lantern, but
and now he's dead.
And now he's dead. Yeah, I'm introducing him, and don't care about him because he's gonna die.
We're not gonna use it. But what you said about the 8-year-old you, and that's a lot of times with me when I'm reading something, and it does something that I don't expect. Like, for example, Darkseid fighting vampires is just like, holy crap! This is the 8-year-old me goes, this is awesome.
Yeah. I mean,
that's what I like about DC versus just this. I can't tell you what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I think it's a funny thing because my editor when we started the book was Ben Abernathy, who was the executive editor at DC and was the head Batman editor, and so we built the first 20 issues together and then started building the new book together. And we sort of needed to go quickly. And so like I had an outline and I was like, look, this is the first 6 issues. There's a bunch of stories, a bunch of ways we can go, but like here's what the first 6 issues are just to get it approved and get the ball rolling.
Right.
And then we were moving so quick that we never filled in the back end. Like, and I knew some of it. Like some of it I was like, well, this definitely has to happen. I just hadn't written it down. Mm-hmm. And some of it like, well, interesting things present themselves as you go and in a world like this. And so, but then Ben left DC. He went to Skybound and he's in charge of G.I. Joe and Transformers and all that stuff. And so I got a new
on the name.
Yeah. He's the guy who's running that show now. Yeah. And so I got a new editor, Matt Levine, who's great, but he came into the relationship that was already formed. And so when I turned in issue 5, he was like, of the new series, he was like, yeah, weird question. I don't know what the hell happens after this. And I was like, oh yeah, let me write it up and get it to you. Because I'd figured it out at that point, but I'd never officially told DC.
Yeah.
And I sent it to him and he was just like, this is what you're doing? And I was like, yeah, is it okay? And he was like, it's so crazy. And I was like, good crazy? And he was like, yeah, good crazy. He's like, I don't think anyone will see this coming. And he's like, and honestly, it's like the kind of big insanity that like I think people buy the book for. So I think he's like, I think you nailed it, which is really good compliment. So
what's next for the DC versus Vampires? What do you have already scheduled? I know. What are you up to?
Issues. You got to be careful what you can talk about.
I know. Don't if you can't talk about some. Don't. I know you're up to issue 6 in the regular series.
Issue 6, the one shot's coming out this week, and then issue 7 is in a month or two, right. And we're going to 12. Okay, so
that's going to
12. This volume will go to 12. So then that'll put us at 12 and 12, and then the 6-issue miniseries and 3 one shots. Mm-hmm. So 31 issues, which is a very weird number to stop at. And then 12 is like a good natural stopping point for the story. And I said to them, if you want more, I have one more story.
Okay.
But if you guys like this ending, I'm also really good at this ending. The one more story is really wild. And I told it to them and they were like, that's really insane. And I was like, yeah, but I think it's really funny. And I oftentimes pitch things that I'm like, this makes me laugh. And they're like, yeah, but that's not... we also want to sell books and have them be exciting.
Yeah, but sometimes the best ideas start as jokes, you know, like you really
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to the thing about, like you said about like 8-year-old brains, like that's sort of where I approach this book from, of just like, what is the craziest sort of wackiest thing we could do, but then give it weight and seriousness and drama of like, well, these are people who are dying and fighting for their lives, and their loved ones are turning against them and all these things, but they start as these sort of novelty, crazy ideas, and that's sort of a fun evolution, because you take something that sounds very fun on paper and then you make it very intense in places, but it still leaks out as very fun sometimes, and I really enjoy that.
So what you're saying is Ambush Bug saves humanity?
Obviously, Ambush Bug is going to be a major hero. No, I mean, one, it's a big assumption that humanity gets saved. Let's just put that there. But no, I think there's we're introducing some new people, but it's a lot of the people who are on the table already.
Okay.
Gonna have big roles. There's a new character introduced who's a fan favorite in the one shot, and it's actually well, he's a Green Lantern. I'll just say it.
Okay.
He comes out this week. He's a Green Lantern, and I always have a hard time writing Green Lanterns. I think Green Lanterns are really hard characters to write because their powers are limited by imagination.
Right.
And so you want their powers to be imaginative. You want to constantly read something where you're like, I can't believe they did that. How did they think of that? And that's really hard to do all the time.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and people have been doing the characters for decades and decades. So there's never a point where you're like, I've never seen that before. It's really hard. Right. And I came up with a Green Lantern thing that's coming up, and I was like, I don't think we've seen this. And I called a bunch of my friends who are ex-Green Lantern writers and Green Lantern super fans, and I was like, am I missing something? And everyone was like, no, I don't think we've ever done that before. And I was like, oh,
nice.
And then I was kind of mad because I was like, oh, I could have made that my Green Lantern story. I could have pitched a 12-issue Green Lantern thing as that and gone with it. But I think for hardcore Green Lantern fans, there's something very wild coming up in the one shot this week.
Good to hear. Yeah. I'm just a little disappointed you haven't put Prez in it yet. So.
Look, I literally have a list of just everyone, and we just cross people off and bring them out and kill them. I don't think Prez is on the list.
Well, who's the other one?
I was going to make a joke about Brother Power the Geek, but yeah.
No, I don't think he's on the list either. There's
darn.
I don't know why Prez isn't on the list. Prez would have been great. Some people are really hard to fit in.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, like I was always like, I want to use Commandy, and then I was like, I don't have any way to use Commandy.
How would you get him there? Yeah,
I don't. I don't.
But how though? He's all the way in some weird dystopian future.
He's in the future,
not necessarily in the outworld.
Like there's a bunch of the characters, like I love Jonah Hex, and I was like, well, I don't have a way to use Jonah Hex, but I love Jonah Hex so much, and I'm always like, well, I want to figure out a Jonah Hex, and I spent a long time like cracking a thing where I was like, well, we could do this and this, and I was like, this is so much work to just get Jonah Hex. I should just pitch a Jonah Hex one shot and scratch that.
A Western vampire one shot with Jonah Hex and Batlash, and you could do a whole bunch of things.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
There you go.
Batlash.
I love me some Jonah Hex.
Names out in this one.
Yeah. The actually, it's funny you hinted at something there, and I wanted to ask a question about. So when you plan these sort of large scale storylines, do you know each step, or do you just have a general idea of where it's going, or do you really map it out in detail?
So the first volume was mapped out in super detail.
Yeah.
I always, whenever I do a story, I know how it ends. I don't believe in getting in a car and turning it on without knowing where you're driving. Like you have to know that, but the route you take to get there sometimes is more flexible. And so the first volume, I mean, before we started, I had every issue. Like, these are the key things that happen. And some things shift, but like, this is the key stuff people need to know. This one, I knew what the end was always. And I knew up to issue 6 really well. Mm-hmm. And I had to give them that. And then there was a couple things that I wanted to figure out. There were a couple characters who sort of got brushed off in the first half and in the first volume. And I was like, I want to I don't want to leave people wondering where characters went. I want to explain where they went. And so there's some of that of like answering where people went to. And the big one is Cyborg. So Cyborg is going to have a big return, and what deal with, you'll see what he's been doing, which is crazy. And there's a few things like that, but those were kind of question marks of like, well, what is Cyborg? Like, I know what he's doing, but how does he fit into the bigger story? And there's a few like that. So there was a really good map for half of it, a destination, and then a bunch of like things with pins in them that I was like, I would like to do this. But some of those pins are like, figure out Jonah Hex, and then that eventually gets taken out. And so, and then new things pop up as you're like, oh, I really would like to spend more time with, you know, Dr. Fate. And so Dr. Fate sort of becomes a bigger character and things like that.
Oh, that's good.
That's interesting. Now, I wanted to ask you also about music. You, early in your career, you were working for, was it a punk rock record label?
Yeah, I mean, I came up as like a punk rock kid from New York City. I grew up going to, you know, shows in New York and up and down the East Coast. And yeah, I sort of did everything that had to do, you could do in the music business that doesn't involve having musical ability. Yeah. So I've like booked shows and printed t-shirts and tour managed bands, and you know, I can tune a drum set and change a guitar string and all of that, but I can't really play the guitar. And yeah, I ran a record label. I ran an independent label for a while. And that was sort of what I did, is, you know, a small thing out of my living room and stuff. But that's what I did for years before I was a comic book writer. Yeah.
Right. And that seems to find its way into your writing, because you wrote, or you co-wrote, Archie Meets the Ramones.
Yes. Yes.
And the B-52s.
And Archie Meets the B-52s.
Yeah. That actually came about, Alex Segura, who I co-wrote those with, worked at Archie, and he wrote Archie Meets Kiss.
Yes. Yeah.
And I really loved Archie Meets Kiss. I thought it was a great book, and I don't like Kiss at all. I was just never a Kiss fan. If you're going to put on makeup, you can be the Misfits. You don't have to be Kiss. Like that's sort of where I go.
Absolutely.
And I said to him once, I was like, you should do Archie Meets Kiss, but with a good band. And he was like, what's a good band? And I was like, Ramones. Like, that's who the Archies should meet, is the Ramones. Yeah. Like, that's obvious. And he was like, cool, yeah, that's a great idea. And I said, how do we do that? How do we make that happen? And he said, you have to go out and get the Ramones. And I said, doesn't Archie do that? And he said, no, we're a small independent publishing company. We don't have the resources for that. And so I spent 15 months getting the rights to the Ramones estate.
Who do you contact for those rights at this point?
Oh man, I was calling. It was a nightmare. The reason it took so long is because I kept getting sent to the wrong people. And so I would literally go to a lunch meeting, and someone would be like, I'd have a presentation, I'd have art. Like, I had someone do art and all this stuff, and I had Archie comics to show them and like all this stuff. And I'd go to a lunch meeting and be like, this is what we want to do. And they'd be like, that's great. I handle merchandising. You want to talk to this person? And I'd be like, okay. And then I'd start the process again and try and get a meeting and go to someone's office, and they'd be like, I handle the music distribution. And I'd be like, oh, because there's such an empire. Yeah. And then it's fractured of estates because of,
everyone's pretty much everyone's gone now, right? Except for Markey.
Yeah, most of them are passed on. The big ones are Joey and Johnny, and those are sort of the two tops of the estate. And so I had to eventually, I got everything I needed except for the likeness rights. And so that was going to Johnny's widow and Joey's brother, and talking to them and explaining like, I'm a lifelong Ramones fan. Like, I saw the Ramones when I was a little kid. I grew up on the Ramones. They're still like one of the most important bands to me. And really just selling them like, this isn't a cash grab. This isn't a cash in. This is like a love letter to your families and what they did. And they were very cool. And I brought it back to Archie and said, I got the Ramones license. And they were very confused that I did that and shocked. And then we're like, all right, let's do the book. Yeah. And then that started, and it did really well. And so they were like, what about an Archie's comic where they're on tour? And we did that for a while, and me and Alex and Joe Eisma drew it. And then we wrapped that, and then the B-52s sort of fell in their lap, and they were like, "You want to get the band back together for the B-52s?" And I was like, "Sure, yeah."
That's awesome. That is not to cast aspersions on Archie comics at all, but that's the only Archie comic I ever bought was Archie Meets the Ramones.
Really?
Yeah, the only one I've ever purchased because I'm an enormous punk rock fan, and that was very easy sell for me when I was in the comic store and I saw it and I was like, oh well, I have to.
Why
This
would
I have to get. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's very flattering. The book I actually pitched initially, there's an excellent Archie book, even if you're not an Archie fan, called Afterlife with Archie, which is very
I'm sorry, you know what? I have the collection of that.
It's
I do
great.
have that. I'm sorry, yeah, I do.
And so I pitched them. I was like, Archie Meets the Ramones should be that, but for punk rock. And they were like, what? And I was like, it should be dark and messed up. And one of the things, I think I had them for a little bit, where I was like, you bring them back to the 70s, Betty becomes Debbie Harry basically and becomes a superstar.
I love it.
And like Reggie is buying stocks and just is a rich music executive and all this stuff, and Archie's lost. And I sort of had them, and I was like,
is sniffing bottle glue.
I was like, Jughead is on the Bowery outside CBGB's, and I was like, he's got hooked on heroin. And I was like, they call him Junkhead. And I saw all of the Archie people's eyes just be like, and I was like, oh, I think I lost them. And at that moment, they were like, we're going to keep it PG. And I was like,
but they were okay with Jughead turning into a zombie and eating.
Yeah, they were okay with that.
Not a junkie.
Yeah, I was so proud of Junkhead.
Junkhead is brilliant.
And I said it, and I just watched everyone in the room be like, and I was like,
ooh,
no. Sometimes you get up and you're just like, oh, I struck out so bad on that one. And that was one of them.
That's amazing. I love it.
So now, if we want to do a Ramones comic, you're the guy to go to, right?
What's funny is that I had just permission to do stuff for a long time, and I would have to run it by them, but like there was not a clear end point for a little bit, and so I was like, well, I could do a Ramones comic like without Archie, and then I was like, well, I don't need to do that. Like I did what I set out to do, and so at some point we said to them, like, thank you so much, this was great.
That's a labor of love, huh? That 18 months trying to get it done. That's a
Oh yeah. I mean, it was two things. I mean, I'm a huge Ramones fan, and I also grew up reading Archie. Like there was a book that was very big for me when I was a little kid, and also I was a struggling comic book writer, and I was like, well, I can go out and
this is a big one.
Navigate. Yeah, I can go out and navigate licenses because I worked in the music industry, and I use that to my advantage to try and get work and get my name out there. And so like when I started the project, I did not have a lot of work, and by the time it came out, I was like working regularly at Marvel, and I was like,
that's great.
In the career spectrum, I don't need this book as much anymore, but in the fun spectrum, it was still everything I wanted to be.
It was a fun book. It really was.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
So on what you're saying, and it takes us to a good point here. What got you into comic books, and at what point did you realize that this is something that I really want to do? We always ask this question. Is there a specific book that you remember that you just read it and went, this is it. This is what I want to do for a living?
So it's a two-part answer here. I got into comics. I grew up with a comic shop on my block.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and both of my parents were writers.
Where did you grow up?
Manhattan.
Okay. We're both New Yorkers too.
Yeah. I grew up in Manhattan, on the Upper West Side. So I said this in an interview once, and people knew where someone messaged me to be like, so you grew up on 93rd Street? And I was like, I did. And I was like, well, we cracked it, figured out what comic book shop I went. They said 92nd, and I was like, no, that's on the other block. That's on 91st. But they were off by one block from an interview. But yes, I grew up in Manhattan, and both my parents were writers, and so they, I had an allowance. It was not a lot of money because my parents were working writers, but their rule was always, if it's reading, you're good. Like we'll pick up the tab. And so I could just go to the comic shop. I mean, it's the first place I could ever go because my mom could watch me cross the street. And once I crossed the street, I was safe and I was okay. If as long as I wasn't run over on West End Avenue, I could make it into the comic shop. And so it was like I literally was going there when I was 6 years old, I think, by myself with just like, $4.
What was the comic shop? What was the name of the comic?
It was called Big Apple Comics.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's great. Great shop. And comics for me, the thing that actually got me into them was I have an older brother, and he was going to the comic shop, and he was very, very adamant of like, don't touch my books, don't ever look at them. And so they were, as soon as he would go outside, I'd grab them and read them. And that, they were just this cool, forbidden thing that suddenly I had access to, and it could be paid for, and all this, like if I wanted a Sega game or I wanted a whatever, it's like, well, that's a conversation with my parents that I'm probably not winning, but like I'm like, I want to read something else, and they would give me my blessing. So that's my love affair with comics, and I just never grew out of it. I just comic shops I go to comic shops every week my whole life. Like that's what I do.
Same here.
And yeah, it's the as for writing, I have a weird thing because I grew up, because I started getting into comics by myself at a super young age. I didn't have a lot of friends who read comics. Like I'd have friends who like dabble, but like it was not a social thing for me. I didn't go with friends. It was what I did in my alone time.
Right.
And so I didn't ever, it never graduated past, there was never a like, well, let's get together and talk about making comics, or I didn't talk about comics with anyone. It's just what I did is read comics. And I never thought about how they were made. Like I did as a kid, like when I was 11 or 12, I was like, I want to draw like, Eric Larson, and tried to do that and was like, oh, I can't draw like Eric Larson. I gave it up after a year. Like, I wanted to draw like Jim Lee, and I couldn't, and I was done. And I never thought about more of the process. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s and I was working in the music industry and sort of getting burnt out on it. It's a pretty brutal industry to work in. Yeah. And I was looking for something else to sort of do. And I was like, well, the only things I'm passionate about are punk rock and comic books. And I was like, and I don't think I can work in music. I could have worked in music for the rest of my life, probably, but like I would have hated music, and I didn't want to do that. And so I was like, well, and I just in the back of my head was like, is there something I could do with comics or whatever? And then the thing that was really triggering for me of like getting the idea flowing is a weird one. But the writer Steve Niles, who wrote 30 Days a Night and Cal McDonald, just an amazing writer, I found out that he was the bass player in a band who I really loved when I was a kid called Gray Matter. And they were an old Washington, D.C. like punk rock hardcore band, like they're contemporaries of like Minor Threat and, like bands, Bad Brains and bands like that.
Really?
Yeah.
He was in that scene.
Yeah. He's like Discord, like Ian Mackay's label, put out his records. He was like,
I gotta look them up now.
They're great. They're a super good band. Yeah. He was in an early like pre-Fugazi version of Fugazi. Like he's just in these bands that were very cool. Yeah, he was in this band Egg Hunt, which is like sort of the precursor to Fugazi. That there's a bunch of people from Fugazi, and I found that out, and it really just like kind of blew my mind that someone had transitioned from this thing I loved to this thing I loved. And my parents were writers, and I never had met a comic writer. I never thought about a comic writer. I never thought about where they come from. I had my favorites, and I knew the people I loved, but I never thought about the process of making them. And just thinking on Steve Niles being a punk rock guy who made comics, I was like, is that a thing? And I just was like, I guess I'm going to try and figure out how to write comics. And I spent a bunch of years trying to figure out how to do it and being pretty terrible at it. And eventually I got better, hopefully. I think I got better.
You've written a lot of stuff, a lot of really good stuff, a lot of like you've Star Wars, Spider-Man, you've written a lot of Batman, you've written a lot of the big names. Yeah. And one of your first things was you wrote something with the Wu Tang, right?
I did. I did a book. Well, to go back, I was working to be more around comics. I quit my full music industry job because it was taking up 60, 70 hours a week. And I was just like, I don't have energy. I was like, I want to just be around comics, and I have money saved up. I don't need a job to pay my rent right now. Like I need money, but like I can pay my rent for a while. I can take a job. So I took a job in a comic book shop, and just to be around comics and sort of full time and be meeting people and stuff. And while I was there, a guy reached out to me someone from the music industry knew that I was trying to make comics and said, "Oh, you should talk to this guy. He knows music and he knows comics." And so this guy reached out to me and he was like, "Hey, I'm a music manager. I'm trying to make a comic for a band. Can I take you to lunch?" And I was just at the point of being broke enough that like, yeah, free lunch is all you need to say. Like you could be like, "Okay, oh yeah, I want to hit you with a car. Can I take you to lunch first?" I'd be like, "Yeah, let's do it." Like, we're in that. We weren't quite there, but we were getting close.
Yeah.
And I went to lunch with him, and we had like a 2-hour lunch where I was just talking, but I didn't know any of the details, and he was just asking all these questions, and I was explaining how things work, and when when it was over, he was like, "This is really helpful. Do you mind if I hit you up again?" And I was like, "No, not at all. It was great. Nice to meet you." And I said, "Hey, man, you got to just tell me like, who's the band or what is it? Like, you're so secretive, but like, can we just do that?" And he's like, "All right, it's RZA and Ghostface Killer from the Wu Tang Clan." And I was like, "Oh," and I was like, "Okay, you have to stop because everything I told you in the back half of that was garbage advice because I thought it was like someone no one would have heard of."
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, "You're trying to use a comic to make your band famous. I did not. That's the advice I gave you. When your musicians are already famous,
Then it's different.
It's a different ball game." And I was like, "This isn't a thing that has to lose money. You could make money on this. People will buy this. People will show up for this." And he was like, "Okay." And so we had a couple more calls about that. And then he called me at one point and was like, "Would you have an interest in writing it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'd love to write it." And that was it. And I wrote, it's called 12 Reasons to Die. And Ghostface put out a concept album that was about like it was a horror crime thing about an old gangster who gets killed and comes back and haunts the mobsters who killed him. And it was this narrative album, very, very cool. Adrian Young produced it. So it had this very like giallo, big, like Godfather type score. It was very, very cool record. And so they were like, just do the story as a comic. And so I did 6 issues of that. And, you know, I did everything. I set it up. We brought it to publishers. I found all the artists. I put the whole thing together. And then when it wrapped, they were really pleased with how it went. And Ghostface is funny because he's just, those guys, some of them are like so prolific that they get offered sort of multiple ideas that are similar, and they're like, "Yeah, we can do both." And so 12 Reasons to Die record did really well, and the record label put it out, was like, "We want to do a sequel." And then a different production company was like, "We want to do a spiritual sequel to it. We want to do a similar thing." And I don't think either half knew that he was doing both. That he was doing a literal and like spiritual sequel to it. And so the label called me and was like, "We want the narrative, but he's not going to write a story like the way you'd write a story. Do you want to come in?" Excuse me. They were like, "Do you want to come in and co-write the record with him?" And so I did, and so I worked on the 12 Reasons to Die comic, but had nothing to do with the record. And then there's a 12 Reasons to Die 2 record that doesn't have a comic, and I had nothing to do with that.
Wrote it, but you worked on it.
No, I didn't write that. That's the literal sequel. I wrote a thing called 36 Seasons, which is a record that is not directly connected, but is thematically connected.
So what's your credit on the record, writer?
Well, that is a funny one because I wrote the story.
Right.
And I was like, "This is the story." And then they were like, "How are these songs?" And I was like, "Well, this is just a story. You can chop it up." And they were like, "You chop it up." And so then I was like, "How many songs is it going to be?" And they were like, "It's 12." And I was like, "Okay, so then these are the songs. Like, this is what they are." And I named some of them. I think they renamed most of them, but I named all of them. I think they renamed most, but I think some of the names are still mine. And then they were like, we're having guests come in, like Pharoah Monch is coming in and AZ's coming in, all these people, guest rappers. You need to like figure out who their characters are and write down their characters. So I wrote it like it's not a screenplay, but it's
almost like a movie. Right.
Yeah, it's like a 20-page document of like, here's this, and this is the backstory, and this is who these characters are. And then we were there, and like I sat in the studio with them, like I wrote the music video pitch and they directed the music video, and I did all this. And then when it came time to put out the record, I was supposed to co-write the I was credited co-writer, like I named the record and all this stuff. And then they were like, "Hey, we have a problem." And I was like, "What is the problem?" And they were like, "We can't credit you as co-writer." And I was like, I did co-write it. And they're like, we know. The problem is that writing in music publishing is a very specific thing. Yeah. And you didn't write the actual lyrics or the music or the beats.
Right.
You're not the lyricist and you're not the music writer. And so there's no third option. What you did, there's no credit for.
They don't have anything like concept by or...
Well, that's what the end credit is like based on the story by Matthew Rosenberg and all this stuff. Okay. But like, I don't have a writing credit. And so sometimes I'm like, yeah, I wrote this record. And people are like, well, it's just based on a story. And I'm like, no, it's really more than that.
Yeah.
But like legally, I can't say, I mean, I can say whatever I want legally, but legally they can't, you know, like I would be entitled to publishing, which I probably should be entitled to publishing, but like that's a whole other thing, and I don't need the publishing money or whatever. They, you know, a lot of people worked harder on it than I did, and they deserve their credit and whatever. But there's a weird where I'm like, I co-wrote this record. Also, the inside of the record, when we were just about done, they were like, we want to do the inside of the LP and the CD, like one of those read-along books for where you get the record and the play the record and the chime hits and you do it. And they were like, we want to do that. And I was like, that sounds cool. And they're like, do it as a comic, you do it. And so I went out and had to hire 12 artists to do the double page spreads that are like a summation of each song in one image or a few panels. And so it's, there's a very cool like liner notes booklet that is all these like David Lapham and Joel Jones, just all these cool artists, Michael Walsh, all just did like cool comic art for it.
So that is the most complicated project I think I've ever heard of.
So we thought we were interviewing the DC Vampires writer. We didn't know we were interviewing one of the Wu Tang. It's really like,
well, he's like,
it's good, big for us.
He's like the author in residence for the Wu Tang.
It's like a guest,
the stepbrother, the redheaded stepchild of the Wu Tang.
Yeah, when Wu Tang started in the '90s, there was all those guys where you're like, you're not actually in the Wu Tang Clan, but like you're there. I'm like the next step of that. I'm like the guy who you're like, that guy's not this guy, but he knows this guy who knows this guy. I'm like 9 steps out,
You're 12 chambers from the Wu Tang. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. That's correct. Yeah. If there's 12 chambers, or there's, however many chambers, I'm in like chamber 137.
Okay. But you're in a chamber.
I'm in a chamber. Not a lot of people are in chambers, but like, they don't ever go. They don't go to those chambers. They don't know that they're there, but I'm there. Yeah.
You're that you are the comic book guy for Wu Tang and the Ramones. Come on, how many people can say that?
It's true.
If you ever find yourself on our island, we're on Staten Island.
Sure.
The RZA actually designed one of our movie theaters, the Alamo Draft House out here. It's designed by the RZA. He based it on a movie called The Flying Guillotine.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the whole thing's like kung fu.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Are you still in New York?
Fun to see.
Still
yeah.
Are you still in Manhattan or?
Yep.
Nice.
Never left.
Yeah.
RZA is RZA and Ghost were amazing to work with, but RZA is I used to not like telling stories about them because they're like kind of private dudes, but RZA is one of the most impressive people I've ever been around. Like, just there's not a lot of times in my life where I've been around someone where I'm just like, oh, that person is actually a genius. And it's just like, they used to just call me and be like, RZA wants to see you. And it would be like 11:30 at night. And I'd be like, where? And they'd be like, Bushwick. And I'd be like, I'm in Harlem. And they'd be like, all right, get in a cab. And I'd be like, no one's going to pay for that cab, so I'm going to take the subway.
Yeah.
I'm taking a $100 cab that I can't get reimbursed for. I'm going to take the train. I'll be there in 2 hours. But you go to I'd go to RZA's studio at 1:30 in the morning, and there'd be just like, he just kept crazy hours, and there would be like a reporter from NPR trying to interview him, publicist trying to get him to approve stuff, me, and like a film editor showing him stuff. And we literally, the first time I ever had to do that, I went out there, and it was not a joke. There was a NPR reporter, someone from a design company or marketing thing showing him some kind of headphones, headphone designs. And me, and then someone else, and he was editing the score to a movie. And so he would sit there and just go one by one. And he'd be like, what's your next question to the reporter? And we'd just have to sit there and the reporter would be like this. And he'd give a 3-minute answer. And then he'd be like, turn to me and be like, show me a page of art. And I'd hold it up and he'd be like, it's too dark. And I'd be like, okay, we'll get it recolored. And then he'd turn to the headphones guy and be like, the cans need to be bigger. And then he'd turn around and be like, play me that track again. And then they'd be like, he'd start it and he'd be like, the beat comes in an eighth of a second too late. He's like, bring the beat back 1/8 of a second. And the producer would punch it up and he'd be like, bring the hi-hat up to 10%, bring the kick drum down 20%. And they'd do it and be like, that sounds good. And then he'd turn back to the reporter and be like, next question. And I was like, I don't know. Like
and this is 1:30 in the morning, right?
Oh yeah. And they're like running out and he's just like, who wants dinner? And like, they'll just run out and then everyone will be like, I want dinner. And then like, he's vegan. So like everything comes back and it's just like vegan Chinese food or whatever. And that's not what I thought. It was okay. Like, so a whole lot of just like, yeah. And I just always was like, everyone in the room is disoriented by just the speed and the efficiency and whatever.
Yeah.
But I was also just like, I don't know why you don't just do the interview for 20 minutes and then talk to the headphone guy for 10 minutes. But I think it's because like the music producer guy is a lot of downtime while he adjusts things.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't want to sit there and wait. So he's like, I don't want 5 minutes of work to just be me sitting there waiting for someone. So I'll answer a question and I'll do this and that. And I was like, I think that's what this is. And it's so, like, my brain couldn't do it. Most people's brains couldn't handle that.
Yeah,
and he's just so efficient. And so, you know, it's how you get to be someone like RZA. It's just you're a master of 100 different things at once.
That's awesome.
Did you ever listen to his meditation album?
No.
Oh, if you could find, I have it. So I think it was like free on Apple Music at one point or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I downloaded it and it was just the craziest thing. Like he was talking about the basement that he made music in. And he's like, imagine yourself in this basement that has all your influences in it. And like, it was just really crazy. Like you get that sense that he's on another level.
He's on another level. Yeah. But he's also just like, they used to tell me like, he sometimes I just get a call, be like, he's driving through this area of town in 20 minutes, be there and you can hop in his car. And I would go and I'd hop in his car.
Stand on the corner.
And yeah, I'd wait on the corner and then a fucking black SUV shows up with tinted out windows and the door opens and he's like, get in. And I get in and I talk to him. And a very helpful assistant told me once, he was like, when he starts heading towards a bridge or a tunnel, get the fuck out because he's not
going to stop.
You're going to be in New Jersey with no way home. Like this happens a lot where people are just like, where am I? Is there a train? And they're like, no, call a car service. And they're like, you just have to, whatever's going on, when you see that you're a block from a bridge or a tunnel, go, hey, I got to go. And they'll just stop and let you out. And I was like, oh, okay. And so that was always on my mind of like, if I get too caught up in this conversation, I'm going to be kidnapped to New Jersey.
It's amazing.
I don't know. You're in like the 57th chamber.
Yeah, maybe.
You're up there.
I'm up there. Climbing chambers. I haven't been in a chamber in a long time though.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but he may call you randomly any day and just say, you know.
If we just bring that back to comic books, I imagine that's what it would be like working with like Lex Luthor or Wilson Fisk. You know, like you have no.
You go.
You're just.
Oh, for sure.
Agency, You're just working and.
No, he's a comic book guy too. Riz is a comic.
Oh yeah. We talked about the first time I ever hung out with him. He was like, you know what? He's like, you know what sucks? And I was like, what? And he's like, they don't make kung fu comics anymore. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, Iron Fist, Deadly Hands, Kung Fu. Yeah. He's like, those books are so good. And he's like, they just capture action so well. He's like, you wouldn't think they could do a martial arts film on a comic, but people could do it. I was like, yeah, it's a real skill. And I said to him once, I was like, you know, there's a couple good Kung Fu comics that were kind of recent. I was like, you know, there's a really good Ed Brubaker, David Aja, Iron Fist run. Mm-hmm. And he was like, yeah. And I actually went and bought him that. And there's a book a top shelf book by Kagan McLeod that's a Kung Fu comic, and I went and I bought those and gave them to him as a gift. And I was like, you want Kung Fu comics? Like, yeah, check these out. And he was like super into it. So yeah, no, he definitely knew his stuff, and he's not, I don't think a weekly
Right.
week Wednesday warrior or anything, but like he definitely grew up on the stuff and knew the stuff and could talk about like, you know, a lot of comic, like, I know people who work at comic companies who couldn't talk about comics as much as him.
Well, that's what Method Man would shop at the same comic shop with us, and he would have a box just filled from his week stuff. He wouldn't go in every week, but he would go in, once every 2 or 3 months and grab his whole entire box, and that would be how he got his comic, because they were on the road a lot and he just didn't have the time. So
they definitely all knew that stuff, and yeah, it was very cool. It's hard because I meet a lot of people who are in the entertainment business and whatever, and obviously, especially in like film TV, there's a lot of people who understand that comics is a sort of good gateway to money in some regards, but they don't know it. And so when you go into a thing and someone's like, I like comics, I'm always a little guarded, where I'm like, and it's fine to just be like, I like comics, I don't really read them, like that's okay. But I've sat there, like in Hollywood meetings where people say they like comics, and I'm like, you don't know anything about comics, and whatever, you're just saying that. And so it's nice when someone's like, I like comics, and then you can talk to them and they're talking about Steranko, and you're like, oh, okay, like we're
legitimate.
You know what you're talking about. And Riz is definitely one of those people for sure.
Well, usually when we get to the end of our interview, we like to ask 3 questions, like rapid fire questions, I guess, basically, but not really, that we just throw at you, and it's always the same 3 questions, so that usually falls on me. The first question is, what character that you haven't worked on would you like to work on?
Man, you worked on
a lot of characters.
So many.
I mean, we barely got a chance to talk about most of the stuff at Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, there's not
any character in any, it doesn't have to be
in any medium,
any character that you would love to turn into a comic book, or you would love to write something, doesn't have to be comic book, anyone you would like to work on.
Man, that's really, I really love Bond. I'm a big James Bond nerd. Bond was always one for me, that was a big one, but I don't know, I'm going to give a really really weird answer that doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
There's a Wong Kar-wai film from a bunch of years ago called Chungking Express. That's one of my favorite movies. Yeah, and it's just this beautiful short stories about these characters who live in this strange universe that centers on this fast food restaurant, and they're all either work there or go there, and they sort of fall in love there, and there's a drug runner story, and there's a love story, and there's all these different things. And that, to me, I think it's one of my all-time favorite storytelling conventions, of just like this fast food stand, the people who inhabit it, all of these interesting lives. And I've always been like, I want to do something like that. I want to do a story like that. And I've tried to make it work in superhero comics a bunch of times, and it's just a really hard sell. But like, for just cards on the table and I could do anything, like I'd do a Chungking Express comic, which no one on earth would buy. But that's
fascinating. It would be for you.
But if you could find a way to fit it in, like you said, to a superhero thing, where if it's I'm trying to think here, like
I mean, I pitched Marvel. I really was desperate to do a Bar with No Name comic. That's what I wanted to do at Marvel.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to just be like, this is the bar where the villains go. This is about, it's Cheers, but for villains.
Right, villains, yeah.
And then they were like, well, you can't really do an episodic thing like that. And so then I had a whole story, and I was like, it's this is the story, but it takes place in this sort of Cheers type setting.
Yeah.
And they rightly were like, there's not enough of an audience for that. They were like, you'd have to make a character the lead and make it their book. And then the more we talked about it, I was like, it's not going to work.
Yeah, it wouldn't work that way. Yeah, that's really good. I like that idea.
That would be fun. Second question is, what artist would you like to work with that you've never worked with before?
Living. Yeah, this is living.
Could be anyone your favorite of all time. You could get anyone.
It'd be Bernie Wrightson.
Okay.
Bernie Wrightson is the master.
The
Jeff Darrow is up there as one. The problem is, like, a bunch of my all-time favorites have done covers for me.
Yeah.
And so, like, I didn't really work with them exactly, but like, I have a Jim Lee cover.
Right.
I have a few Jim Lee covers on my books. Like, I have just a ton of people like that, where it's like, oh, these are some of my favorite people who've ever drawn comics have done that. I have Alex Ross covers on books. So Bernie Wrightson, Jeff Darrow would be the other one.
Yeah.
Jeff Darrow and Bernie Wrightson are my two.
Wrightson's a great choice.
I mean, he's the greatest draftsman of all time in comics, by my estimation.
Oh, fantastic stuff.
Final question: who should be the next Batman?
Wait, are we talking about in comics or in movies?
In movies.
In the DCU,
Who should play the next?
Yeah, I was like, I don't know. It's probably one of the Robins. I don't know.
What actor should play?
What
Batman
actor should be the next Batman?
in the DC?
I mean, I like Robert Pattinson. He was good. The next Batman. You know who would be a great Batman? If you say who should be anyone, I'm going to give the same answer. Would be Denzel Washington. I would like to see
older,
like a Frank Miller style, Dark Knight with Denzel Washington as Bruce Wayne.
Oh, he'd be good at it.
He would be good at it.
Yeah, I mean, like he's going to do the calm and he's going to do the billionaire playboy thing well, and then when he goes off, it's going to be do full training day of him just beating people and spitting. Yeah, Denzel Washington would be my Batman.
Wow, that is a
great answer.
That's an unexpected answer. I like that. That's really good.
Listen, if you ever need to use two aging YouTube guys in one of your stories,
I appreciate that. You never know. You'll probably die in the story, but
we're okay with that.
That's fine.
That's the point. We want
cannon fodder.
We want to be cannon fodder. Do you have any appearances coming up? Any conventions or anything that you want to plug?
No.
You do New York Comic Con?
No. I mean, I go hang out outside it.
No, you don't.
I'm not really doing cons right now. If I have my choice between going, I love conventions, and conventions have been great to me, and I love the New York Comic Con guys are great, and it's the first show I ever tabled at. I have just a real soft spot for everyone at the organization, and they're very great to me and always generous and stuff. But if I'm going to make an appearance and try and use whatever stature I have to try and bring people someplace to get things signed, I'm going to go to a comic shop. And I'm just, I don't have a ton of free time. And so my time, I make more money at a Comic Con, but I like going to a comic shop more. So I actually am doing for the new book for We're Taking Everyone Down With Us. We haven't announced it yet, but I'm going to do a little signing tour and hit up a bunch of shops.
Great. In this area?
In the whole country.
Awesome.
Very nice.
Yeah. We'll try to catch you at one of those because unlike you, I go to like a convention every week.
Yeah, it's crazy. I used to be a 17 or 18 shows a year guy.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to do that in the next 3 months.
God bless. I wish you luck. It's I love it. I love conventions.
We love conventions. We love conventions. We love shops. We think shops are the lifeblood.
I'm a small convention guy. I like
we like small conventions.
That's I loved growing up like the Big Apple shows in New York. Like that was the Penn Station shows and stuff. That was what I grew up on.
That's the first show I ever went to was a Big Apple show.
Oh yeah.
And the Penn Plaza, right?
Plaza
Hotel.
Yeah. Same. I have a Marvel Secret Wars action figure signed by Jim Lee because Jim Lee went to one.
The time I went, it was Frank Miller. I got Frank Miller.
We might have the same show because I got Jim Lee to sign a Punisher War Journal at that show.
Oh, that's nice. That
was. I mean, that's pre Comic Con, New York Comic Con.
Yeah.
That was a great show.
Great show. Great show.
So,
I got all my missing issues of Star Wars that I needed.
Nice.
There.
You could edit this, but one of the experiences I had at that con was we were walking around, my friend and I, and he points over to the side and he goes, "Look, some guys came dressed as Gwar." And it was actually Gwar.
Why would
That's amazing.
I
don't know. It just seemed irrelevant to what we're really doing.
Oh no, that's great. I love that.
Yeah. But yeah, it was I went over and I was like, "Hey," and then I realized, like, wait a minute, this is them.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But that's when it was different then. You would have that. You would see Frank Miller walking around and it's not it's definitely like that anymore.
And it's also weird for me because I'm like a professional or whatever, and so there's sort of like when I go to a convention, I want to be at my table for an hour and then I want to walk around and dig through back issue bins and like see people and stuff, and so it's like harder to do that. It's like, well, if a place has flown me out, I'm supposed to sit there and sign.
It's hard as a member of Wu Tang to just walk around with.
I need a bodyguard and I need security, and
the black band pulls up and takes you.
It takes you, But yeah, no, I do miss the old show days for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you got just check out some of the smaller ones if you have time in the New York, New Jersey area. There's some really good small conventions.
Yeah, for sure.
We, just chatting. We've made a lot of friends with promoters and vendors just by going and doing this little YouTube thing we're doing.
Awesome.
My next video when I do, I'm gonna have like 7 people. I'm gonna do 4 interviews at a time.
I love it. Yeah, you could set it up like the Brady Bunch so that everyone's in a box.
Yes.
Going
Yeah.
on.
I'm gonna try that next time. That's
9 panels.
9 panels.
9 panels like Watchmen.
There you go.
Yeah.
You.
Perfect.
Matthew, thank you so much for taking
Thanks
the
for your
time.
time.
Thank you guys. This was super fun.
Ever want to be on with us again to promote anything you want to talk about, just reach out to us.
This is a blast. I'd love to come
We
back.
would have you on anytime. This was a lot of fun for us.
Awesome.
Completely
Yes,
different than what we thought. I had no idea we had, Wu Tang royalty going with us. So
well, sure. Yeah, I keep quiet about that.
we're
But,
Staten Islanders, so we
yeah, it's important. Yeah, that's your economy. I get it.
It's our economy.
It's our economy.
Well, I get it.
Cash rules everything around us. I can't say much
It's
more.
true. It's true.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
your
so much.
time.
Thanks.
I really
Thanks, guys.
appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to that book.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm really
Thank
looking
you.
for that. You
And
said
what-
it comes out. When does it come out again?
March 26th.
March 26th.
March
Thank
26th.
you.
Everyone should go out and buy it.
Yep.
Thank you for spending time with us. We'll send this to you when it's done, Matthew, and
Awesome.
we'll talk again.
Yeah, this was great, guys. And if you need, I'll boost it on my channels. But anything I can do to help,
Thank you.
let me
Thank
know.
you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll catch you at one of your store signings.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I was going to go out to JHU, but I don't think we have time.
Okay.
That's my
Are you doing Forbidden
Stan.
Planet or Midtown?
Midtown.
Midtown.
You doing any Jersey shops?
We're figuring that out now. I think there's a place in Jersey called Final Boss that really wanted us to come that I've never been to. I like Eastside Mags a lot. I know them,
That's
and so I was going to go.
Bad Mags.
Yeah,
We
but
were just at Fat Moose Comics this past.
oh yeah. I've never been there, but I know. I know
it's
they're-
absolutely fantastic.
Cool store.
It's the oldest store in Jersey.
Oh, is that true? That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a huge comic shop. From back in the day of touring, I would always when we were in bands, I would be like, I gotta go to the comic shop. That's gonna be the cool place. And so I've been, and that just never left me. So I try and go to as many shops as I can all the time whenever I travel. So this is my excuse for going.
I do that on vacation. And my wife hates it.
Oh yeah, same.
I'm like,
same.
I gotta go. And I'll go to 4. I'm like, I'm going to these 4. It's like,
Yeah. My girlfriend loses her mind. She's
Yeah,
just like,
same.
are you serious? She's like, our trunk is full of cars and we're in a rental house. Why do you
That's
need
Spain.
45 books?
Where are
I'm
you
like,
putting those? Who cares?
yeah, it doesn't matter. All right, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll
I
talk to you
appreciate it.
again
It was a
soon.
blast. Yeah.
Take care of yourself.